Okay, so as you see on our menu, it talks about the Oktoberfest being a 100-year-old recipe. And the story behind that is goes back to when my boss, I apprenticed with a German-trained brewer, and when he was an apprentice, he worked at the Anaheim Brewery in Munich. And one of the things he had to do as an apprentice was to keep a journal of everything that he learned as he was working in the various brewery departments. So he'd do a couple weeks in the classroom and then a week in the malt house, and a couple more weeks in the classroom and a week in the brew house. And he kept this journal for what he learned every day, and the journal was graded. And if the instructors felt like he wasn't paying attention in those different departments, then he had to repeat that week. And so it was very important for him to keep that journal up to date. And the story he told me was that he was walking around the brewery one day. There was not much to do. He was actually kind of worried about what he was going to write down. So he and a colleague were in the tunnels connecting the buildings of the Paulaner Brewery in Munich, kind of pushing on doors, and he opened one door, and it was a storage room full of huge wooden barrels. And they were all empty, but on the top of one of the barrels was an old leather notebook. And they took it down and dusted it off and opened it up, and it appeared to them to be a book of recipes. So they took the book to the brewery historian, who himself was an older brewmaster, and he looked through the notebook and he said, well, based on what's in here, I think this book is about 100 years old. And that would put the book at about 1894, because he told me this story a couple of years after he had graduated from his apprentice program. So he, for his journal entry that day, wrote down the story of finding this book and taking it to the historian. That's actually the first entry in my apprentice notebook when I worked for him. And the recipe that he copied was for an Oktoberfest Märzen beer. And when I was learning how to do recipe formulation from him, he gave me those notes and he said, here's your assignment. You go home this weekend and write an Oktoberfest Märzen recipe. I'm going to do the same. And then on Monday we'll compare the two recipes, and your grade will be how close you come to my recipe. So Monday morning came along and I showed him my notes, and he said, well, they're not identical, but no one would know that they're different. They were that close. So then we took his notes and we wrote a recipe and brewed our first Oktoberfest Märzen off of those old 100-year-old notes. And those notes were the basis of this Oktoberfest recipe that Barbara and I wrote. When did we write that? In 2002, and we've never changed it ever since we wrote that recipe, because we're so happy with the results.